Austrian game studio Broken Rules has a penchant for developing and publishing video games that run up against the norms of what we often imagine video games to be. One of their previous games, Secrets of Raeticon, violated the norms of video game naming conventions, and I'm assuming it was an SEO nightmare. Also, it's an incredibly cleverly designed platformer in which you spend most of your time flying. You see, you're playing as a bird in a world of other birds, mammals, and mysterious artifacts. Now, their latest game, Old Man's Journey, is a much simpler game in terms of scale and scope, but it's no less beautiful than their other works. In Old Man's Journey, you play as the titular old man as he walks across an idyllic and hilly countryside, sometimes sitting down on benches or riding boats, and falling asleep on a journey to somewhere. The journey begins after the bearded and balding protagonist receives a letter. There's no word as to what's in the letter, but it's his primary motivation to keep walking. This is a brief adventure puzzler with a poignant, albeit ephemeral story. Now, the gameplay of Old Man's Journey is pretty simple. You walk forward, occasionally click on objects to interact with them, take naps, and shift the environment around in order to continue your journey. See, the old man's country is full of hills and valleys. Now, to traverse them, you need to bring them nearer or further away. In a way, it's a game about perspective. Think about the way that landscapes seem to change depending on what direction you're observing them from. That's what's going on in Old Man's Journey. If you can shift two hills together, even if one hill is off in the distance, the old man can hop between them as though he's moving between the foreground and background planes of the painting. The puzzles don't require particularly deep thinking to solve, though they do gain complexity as the game goes on with the addition of sheep, walls, and wheels. Obstacles that need to be manipulated with a specific order of operations in order to pass. It's nothing too complex. The trouble, in my opinion, is that shortly after Old Man's Journey really hits its stride with its gameplay, it starts winding down. The best puzzles come a bit before the denouement, and while I do think that the game was mostly the right length, I feel that its pacing and challenge level seemed a little divorced from one another. The first part of the game was simple and did a good job introducing mechanics. Wordlessly, I might add. But it dragged on just a little too long, and it didn't introduce new challenges quickly enough. That said, I do appreciate the way that Old Man's Journey pushed me to solve puzzles. I had to pay attention to the environment, click around, experiment, and explore. There was no handle. A somewhat more serious gripe that I took with the game earlier was that it seemed as though the story was not properly fleshed out. On my first playthrough, I noticed that it seemed that the beginning of the game and the very end were the most amazing, emotional parts, but that between the game there was little to tie them together. However, it turned out that I'd suffered a terrible glitch. Apparently, none of the cutscenes played even though they were supposed to. When I imagined that the old man was napping during the game, it turns out that's actually when the cutscenes were supposed to be playing. When I realized what was wrong, I played the game again on OS X instead of Windows, and lo and behold, everything came together perfectly. Old Man's Journey did a great job telling a short story without any words. Much like the game A Bird's Story, which came out a couple years ago, Old Man's Journey does a great job at telling an emotional story without using words, just visuals and atmosphere. Now, I do have to mention that from a technical standpoint, it seems that the game's PC port suffers on account of mobile-focused design, because while the gameplay works fine with a mouse, the PC version of Old Man's Journey has no menu and no proper exit button. You have to Alt F4, Command Q on a Mac, to leave Old Man's Journey like some sort of animal. Now, aside from my gripes with the game's pacing and storytelling that I initially had, I really enjoyed Old Man's Journey. It held up through both playthroughs, with and without the cutscenes, albeit one of the cutscenes was significantly better. Now, the game's art style is just stunning. It's as though somebody animated a cartoony, impressionist little world and made it playable. From a visual standpoint, this game is perfect, and its sense of atmosphere left me wanting to spend more time in its world. Though it was a nostalgic experience, it didn't feel painfully rooted in the past, but was playful, optimistic, and a joy to behold. Overall, Old Man's Journey is a short, sweet experience that I recommend if you're looking for something idyllic. A game that you can sit down and relax with. I feel as though I experienced Old Man's Journey in the wrong way. Instead of sitting at my desk with my PC, I wish the game were framed on my wall, a piece of art to interact with through the day, a conversation piece to show off to visitors and experience beside a friend. Old Man's Journey is available on Android, iOS, OS X, and Windows. Have you played Old Man's Journey? If so, what do you think about it? Hit us up on Twitter at OneRuleBeCool and be sure to share your thoughts. Be sure to follow us for all the greatest game news, editorials, previews, and more. Be sure to follow me at Jordan_Cameron for my own views.